Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes to life. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. The trail had been overgrown for decades, branches scratching and digging at their backpacks as the 5 friends pushed deeper into the Pennsylvania wilderness. Merritt led the way, his GPS showing nothing but green emptiness for miles around. Behind him, Sasha adjusted her camera strap, still hoping to capture something worth posting. Jay and Brandi followed, their usual banter subdued by the oppressive canopy overhead, while Tyler brought up the rear, constantly checking his phone for signal bars that would never come. "You sure we're not lost?" Brandi asked, swatting at a mosquito that had found the gap between her sleeve and glove. "Relax," Merritt called back, not slowing his pace. "I've been planning this route for months. There's supposed to be some old ruins up ahead, a summer camp for the 70s or something." The October air carried a chill that seemed to seep through their hiking gear, and the afternoon sun struggled to penetrate the dense canopy. Dead leaves crunched beneath their boots with each step, the sound echoing strangely in the silence. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered. Even the insects seemed muted, as if the forest itself held its breath. After another hour of climbing over fallen logs and navigating around moss-covered boulders, they emerged into a clearing that made them all stop in their tracks. Before them stretched the remnants of what had once been Camp Whispering Wind, though none of them knew its name yet. Rotting wooden cabins stood like broken teeth around a central courtyard, their roofs sagging under 30 years of neglect. A larger building, presumably the mess hall, dominated the far end of the clearing, its windows dark and empty. "Holy shit," Jay whispered, his voice barely heard in the stillness. Sasha immediately raised her camera. "This is incredible. Look at how the vines have completely taken over that cabin." She clicked rapidly, the camera's beeps unnaturally loud in the quiet. Tyler pulled out his phone and started recording. "Okay, so we just discovered some kind of abandoned camp. This is like Blair Witch Project level creepy." Merritt consulted his map, frowning. "This isn't marked on any of the trail guides. I heard about this place from a friend of my cousin Austin. He told me that it was out here, but..." They approached the nearest cabin cautiously. The door hung open on rusted hinges, revealing an interior thick with shadows and decay. Brandi peered through the gap, her nose wrinkling at the smell of mildew and something else, something sweet and rotten. "Should we go in?" she asked. "Are you insane?" Tyler lowered his phone. "This is literally the beginning of every horror movie ever made. 5 friends find creepy abandoned place, decide to explore, everyone dies horribly." Jay laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, man. It's just an old camp, probably closed down because of budget cuts or whatever." But as they moved deeper into the camp, Merritt found something that made his stomach roll and a chill creep across his skin. Near the mess hall, partially hidden by overgrown weeds, stood a weathered wooden sign. Most of the paint had flaked away, but he could still make out the faded letters. Camp Whispering Wind, established 1984. Below that, in smaller text that he had to squint to read, Memorial to the 7, never forgotten. Guys, Merritt called out, his voice tight. You need to see this. They gathered around the sign, and Sasha immediately started photographing it from every angle. Memorial to 7, she read aloud. What do you think happened here? Nothing good, Tyler muttered, but his curiosity was clearly overcoming his apprehension. He was already filming the sign with his phone. Besides, whatever it was, it happened a decade before we were even born. The mess hall doors stood partially open, revealing a cavern of darkness within. Brandi pushed one of the doors wider, and it creaked on its hinges with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Inside, overturned tables and chairs created a maze of shadows. Shafts of dying sunlight filtered through broken windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stagnant air. There, Jay pointed to the far wall. Look at that. A large bulletin board still hung crookedly above what had once been the serving counter. Pinned to it were dozens of photographs, their colors faded but still visible. Children's faces smiled back at them from across the decades. Kids at campfires, kids swimming in a lake, kids gathered around counselors who looked barely older than college students themselves. But it was the newspaper clipping pinned to the center of the board that made them all fall silent. The headline was barely legible, but Sasha managed to read it aloud. 7 children missing from summer camp. Search continues. The article was dated July 15th, 1994. But there was another clipping below it, this one smaller and yellowed with age. Merritt leaned closer to read it. Camp Whispering Wind closes after single season. Owner's site. Structural concerns with foundation. Jesus, Merritt breathed. 7 kids went missing here. And look at this. The camp only operated for 1 season. They opened in 1994 and closed the same year. Tyler was already backing toward the door. Okay, that's it. We're leaving. Right now. But as he turned, something caught his eye through one of the broken windows. He froze, his phone still recording. Did you guys see that? See what? Brandi asked, moving to stand beside him. I thought I saw... Tyler squinted through the grimy glass. Movement, like someone walking between the cabins. They all pressed against the windows, peering out into the gathering dusk. The camp appeared empty, but there was something unsettling about the way the shadows seemed to shift and flow between the buildings. It's probably just a deer, Sasha said, but her voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, they heard something that was completely out of place in the middle of nowhere, a sound that made every hair on their bodies stand on end. It started as a low humming, almost musical, drifting from somewhere deep in the woods beyond the camp. It was a child's voice, singing a lullaby, but there was something wrong with it. The melody was too slow, too mournful, and underneath it was another sound, a wet breathing sound. What the fuck is that? Jay whispered. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like a physical weight pressing down on them. Then, from the darkness between 2 cabins, came a sound that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives. A chittering, clicking noise like insects, but deeper, as if it came from something much larger than any bug. Brandi grabbed Merritt's arm. "We need to leave, please." But as they turned to flee, they realized the mess hall doors had somehow swung shut behind them. Merritt pushed against them, but they wouldn't budge. The handles turned, but the doors remained firmly closed, as if something was holding them from the outside. "The windows," Sasha said, her voice rising with panic. "We can get out through the windows." Jay tried the nearest window, but it was sealed shut with layers of old paint and rust. He grabbed a chair and smashed it against the glass, but the window was made of a thick, reinforced material that spider-webbed but didn't break. The chittering sound was getting closer now, circling the building like a predator studying its prey. Through the broken sections of glass, they could see shapes moving in the darkness. Not human shapes, not even any known animal shape, but something too big to be human, or even a bear. "The back door," Brandi said. "There has to be a back door." They stumbled through the maze of overturned furniture, using their phone flashlights to navigate the darkness. The air was thick and stale with the smell of aged wood and rot. Merritt found the back door first, but when he tried to open it, his hand came away sticky with something dark and viscous. In the beam of his flashlight, he could see that the door was covered in what looked like cocoons, dozens of them, each about the size of a child, suspended from the ceiling and walls by thick, glistening strands. "Oh, God," Sasha whispered, her camera forgotten in her shaking hands. "Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God." Inside the nearest cocoon, they could see the outline of bones, and hanging from one of the strands was a faded flannel shirt, a hiker who had wandered into the old camp, unsuspecting of danger. The chittering sound erupted from directly above them, so loud that it felt like it was coming from inside their skulls. They looked up to see something that their minds struggled to process. A mass of writhing, segmented limbs clustered around a central body that pulsed with a sickly bioluminescence. It was spider-like, but also somehow reminiscent of a praying mantis, with long limbs that ended in hooks and barbs. Its head was a nightmarish fusion of insect and something else, something that might have once been a bear or a wolf. The creature's eyes, all 8 of them, reflected their flashlight beams like mirrors, and when it opened its mouth, they could see rows of sharp teeth arranged in concentric circles, like a lamprey's maw. Brandi screamed. The creature dropped from the ceiling with impossible speed, landing inches from where Tyler stood. Up close, they could see that its body was covered in what looked like human hair, different colors and textures, as if it had been collecting trophies from its victims over the decades. Tyler ran. He crashed through the maze of furniture, heading for the front of the building, the others close behind. The creature followed, its movements accompanied by that horrible chittering sound and the scrape of its claws against the wooden floor. Jay reached the front doors first and threw his weight against them. This time they burst open, and the 5 friends tumbled out into the night. The stars above seemed impossibly bright after the darkness of the mess hall, but they offered no comfort. "The trail," Merritt gasped. "We need to find the trail." But as they looked around the camp, they realized they were no longer alone. More shapes moved between the cabins, smaller than the creature in the mess hall, but clearly related. They scuttled on multiple legs, their movements quick and erratic, like spiders fleeing from a suddenly illuminated corner. "There!" Sasha pointed to a gap between 2 cabins. "The trail's that way!" They ran. Behind them, the chittering sound multiplied, becoming a chorus of inhuman voices that seemed to come from every direction. The smaller creatures poured from the cabins like water, their claws clicking against the wood structures as they gave chase. Brandi stumbled, her ankle twisting on a hidden root. Jay grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet, but the delay had cost them precious seconds. The creatures were gaining ground, their pale forms visible in the starlight as they flowed across the camp like a living tide. The trail entrance was 50 feet away. 40. 30. That's when the larger creature burst from the mess hall, its massive form moving with surprising speed as it bounded across the clearing. It reached the trail entrance first, rearing up on its hind legs to block their escape. In the moonlight, they could see its full horror. It was at least 8 feet tall, with limbs that could stretch even further. "The lake!" Merritt shouted. "There was a lake in the photos. If we can reach the water—" "Are you crazy?" Tyler's voice cracked with fear. "We'll drown!" "Better than being eaten by that thing." They changed direction, crashing through the underbrush toward what they hoped was the lake. Branches tore at their clothes and faces, but they didn't slow down. Behind them, the chittering had become a roar, and they could hear the creature's claws gouging deep furrows in the earth as it pursued them. The lake appeared suddenly, its dark surface reflecting the stars like a mirror. Without hesitation, Merritt plunged into the water, the others following. The cold was shocking, driving the breath from their lungs, but they swam hard for the far shore. The creatures reached the water's edge and stopped, their chittering becoming agitated. They paced back and forth along the shore, but none of them entered the water. For a moment, the friends allowed themselves to hope. Then, Sasha screamed. Something had wrapped around her leg underwater, something smooth and strong that was pulling her down. She thrashed wildly, but whatever had hold of her was impossibly strong. The others tried to help, but the water was too deep, too dark. She came up once, gasping and choking, her eyes wide with terror. "It's got me," she managed to say, before being dragged under again. This time, she didn't come back up. The remaining 4 friends reached the far shore and collapsed on the muddy bank, gasping and shivering. Behind them, the creatures had vanished back into the forest, but they could still hear that horrible chittering in the distance. "We have to go back for her," Brandi said, but her voice was hollow. "Defeated. She's gone," Merritt said quietly. We all saw whatever was in the water. Tyler was crying now, his phone clutched in his shaking hands. "I got some of it on video, but my phone got wet." They spent the rest of the night huddled together on the shore, taking turns keeping watch. As dawn broke, they could see the camp clearly across the lake, looking almost peaceful in the morning light. If not for Sasha's absence, they might have convinced themselves it had all been a nightmare. But the chittering sounds had returned with the sunrise, and they could see movement in the trees around the lake's perimeter. The creatures were patient, and they weren't giving up. "We need to find another way out," Jay said, his voice hoarse from cold and fear. "There has to be another trail on this side of the lake." They followed the shoreline, staying close to the water's edge. The creatures seemed reluctant to approach the lake, but they shadowed the group's movements from deeper in the forest. After an hour of walking, they found what looked like a game trail leading away from the water. "This has to go somewhere," Brandi said hopefully. "Maybe to a road or another campground." But the trail led them deeper into the wilderness, winding through increasingly dense forest. The trees grew taller and closer together, blocking out more and more of the sky. The chittering sounds grew fainter behind them, but somehow that made things worse. At least when they could hear the creatures, they knew they were safe. The trail ended abruptly at the base of a limestone cliff face. At first it looked like a dead end, but Tyler's flashlight revealed a dark opening in the rock, a cave entrance partially hidden by fallen stones and overgrown vegetation. "A cave," Merritt said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can hide in there until they give up looking for us." "Are you insane?" Tyler shook his head violently. "Caves are worse than abandoned camps. What if we get lost? What if it's full of bats? What if those things find us out here?" Jay interrupted. At least in the cave we can defend a single entrance." They had no choice. The chittering sounds were getting closer again, and they could see pale shapes moving between the trees. They squeezed through the cave entrance, their flashlights cutting through the darkness ahead. The cave was larger than they had expected, with a high ceiling that disappeared into the shadows above. The air was cool and damp, carrying a mineral scent that reminded them of underground springs. But underneath that was something else, something sweet and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. "Do you smell that?" Brandi whispered. They pressed deeper into the cave, following what seemed to be a natural passage. The walls were covered in strange markings, not carved but worn smooth, as if something large had repeatedly brushed against them. The passage opened into a vast chamber, and their flashlights revealed something that made them all stop in their tracks. The chamber was filled with webs, not the delicate geometric webs of common spiders, but massive, irregular constructions that stretched from floor to ceiling. Some were old and dusty, while others gleamed with fresh silk, and suspended throughout the webs were cocoons, hundreds of them, some small enough to be children, others large enough to contain adults. "Oh my God," Tyler breathed. "This is where they come from. This is their nest." Merritt's flashlight beam swept across the chamber, revealing more details that made his stomach turn. The floor was littered with bones, human bones, animal bones, all picked clean and white. In the center of the chamber stood a pile of rocks that resembled an altar, its surface stained dark with substances they didn't want to identify. The walls were smooth limestone, worn by countless years of water and the passage of the creatures themselves. There were no markings, no clues to reveal how long the spiders had lived in these depths, or what their lives had been like before humans arrived in the forest above. Merritt's flashlight beam swept across the chamber, revealing the true horror of their situation. This wasn't just a nest. It was a feeding ground that had been used for decades, maybe centuries. The bones scattered across the floor weren't all human. Some were clearly from deer, bears, and other large animals that had wandered too close to the cave entrance over the years. "They didn't know," Merritt whispered, understanding finally dawning. "The people who built the camp, they had no idea what was down here. They just picked the wrong spot." "Bad luck," Jay said quietly, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The worst possible luck." That's when they heard it, a sound that made their blood freeze. It was coming from deeper in the cave, from passages they hadn't explored yet. The chittering was louder here, more intense, and it was accompanied by something else, a wet, sliding sound, like something very large moving through the tunnels. "We've got to get out of here," Tyler said, backing toward the entrance. "Right now." But as they turned to flee, they realized they were no longer alone in the chamber. Shapes moved in the shadows beyond their flashlight beams, not the large creature from the camp, but dozens of smaller ones, each about the size of a large dog. They had been waiting, watching, and now they were closing in. The friends pressed back to back in the center of the chamber, their flashlights creating a small circle of light in the vast darkness. The creatures circled them, just beyond the reach of their beams, their chittering growing more excited with each passing moment. "The entrance," Merritt said quietly. "If we can reach the entrance." "It's too far," Jay whispered. "There are too many of them." That's when the largest creature appeared, squeezing through a passage at the far end of the chamber. It was even bigger than the one they had seen at the camp, its body swollen with what looked like eggs. This was the queen, the mother of all horrors that had plagued the camp for 30 years. The creature reared up on its hind legs, its multiple eyes reflecting their flashlight beams like stars. When it opened its mouth, they could see not just teeth, but the remains of its most recent meal, scraps of fabric, a child's sneaker, and something that might have been a camp counselor's whistle. Tyler screamed. The sound echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the limestone walls and seeming to go on forever. The creatures responded with their own chittering chorus, a sound so loud and overwhelming that it felt like it was coming from inside their heads. They ran, but there was nowhere to go. The cave entrance was blocked by a seething mass of spider creatures, their claws clicking against the stone as they climbed over each other in their eagerness to feed. The friends were trapped in the center of the chamber, surrounded by 30 years' worth of accumulated horrors. Merritt was the first to fall. Something struck him from behind, and he went down hard, his flashlight spinning away across the cave floor. In the strobing light, they caught glimpses of chitinous limbs and glistening fangs as the creatures swarmed over him. Brandi tried to help, but another creature dropped from the ceiling onto her back, its weight driving her to her knees. She screamed once, a sound that cut through the chittering like a knife, and then she went silent. Jay and Tyler backed against the altar-like pile, their remaining flashlights creating a diminishing circle of safety. But the creatures were patient now. Having tasted blood, they formed a living wall around the two survivors, their eyes glowing in the darkness like malevolent stars. "I'm sorry," Jay said, his voice barely audible over the chittering. "I'm sorry we came here." Tyler nodded, his phone still clutched in his shaking hands. Even now, part of him was thinking about the video he had recorded. The evidence that would never be seen by human eyes. The story that would never be told. The Queen approached slowly, savoring the moment. Up close, they could see that her body was covered in the remains of her victims. Pieces of clothing, jewelry, and hair that had been incorporated in her chitinous shell-like trophies. A camp counselor's name tag was embedded in her forehead, the plastic cracked but still readable. Sarah, head counselor. The Queen opened her mouth, and the friends could see into the depths of her throat, where something that might have been a human skull gleamed wetly in the flashlight beam. The lights went out. In the darkness, the chittering became a roar, and then there was only silence. The search teams would find their abandoned car 3 days later, parked at the trailhead, with no sign of where the 5 friends had gone. The official report would list them as missing hikers, another tragic reminder of how dangerous the Pennsylvania wilderness could be for the unprepared. But deep in the forest, Camp Whispering Wind continued to wait. The creatures had fed well, and they were patient. They had waited 30 years for the last group of visitors, and they could wait another 30 for the next. In the cave below, the queen spider settled back into her web, her belly swollen with new eggs. Soon, there would be more offspring, more hunters to patrol the forest and guard the camp. The cycle would continue, as it had for generations before the camp was built, and as it would for generations after the last board rotted away. The forest held its breath, waiting for the next group of hikers to discover the overgrown trail, waiting for the next feeding. Camp Whispering Wind was always open for visitors. It just never let them leave. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carman's Crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carman's Crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.